Dear Harstem, I'm feeling very frustrated right now. As a Protoss, I have to consider every aspect, while Terran can simply close their eyes and produce units from 2 bases to win. In this game, I chose 4 Gate Blinkstalker, and my opponent used 3 Reapers and 2 Hellions to harass me. But I defended well. My Blinkstalkers were hopping around my opponent's base like a bunny. My opponent came very close to losing, but I also inflicted enough damage. Then I knew my opponent was about to push. I did everything I knew: battery, storm, charge, and push my units forward. However, when my opponent's tank set up, everything fell apart. My army was not smaller than my opponent's, but they managed to break through my defense while battery overcharged and making my micro and macro look like a joke. Please tell me how I can defend against this. Why can Terran blindly mass units while Protoss has to take risks and expand to 3 bases? This was sent in by someone with a Chinese name, which roughly translates to "the Earth is round," so he's at least correct about one thing, is a diamond on the Korean ladder with 4004 MMR exactly, and asked a simple question: is Terran imbalanced? Or does he suck? Let's figure it out together. And here we go, TK-Man versus "the Earth is round," at least according to this blue Protoss player from China. Opening up with a pylon in the main base, no wall here being made whatsoever. I'm never quite sure when I'm allowed to start criticizing this. You know, like where's the line? This feels a little bit like if you have a very young kid, you know, and they burp after they eat, you know, like right in your face. It's like if they're 1 year old, it's kind of cute. And it's like, oh, you know, he burped in my face. Oh, good old babies. If you're a 16-year-old kid, every time he's done eating, just goes up to you, it's like, hey, dad, burps in your face. It's a little bit disrespectful and rude, I think. And I wonder where this line is for Protoss players. Like, when do we want the first pylon to have a purpose? You know, when do we want that first pylon to be positioned here so that a gateway and cybercore can make a semi-wall against a Reaper? Or do we want the pylon over here for a complete Reaper wall? Or, well, actually it needs to be over here. If you build it over here, you're not going to get a good Reaper wall at all. But that's a story for another time. So I think 4004 MMR, this really is an edge case, okay? This is a 5-year-old burping in your face. Like, it's not that cute anymore. It's starting to get a little bit disgusting, but maybe one more time, you know, just close your eyes and pretend like it didn't happen. We also don't have a scout here with a core before Nexus. This is something that I don't mind at all. I actually think this is cool to play, and if you're a ladder player, it's completely fine to mix it in. In general, I hardly ever criticize people for not scouting. If people, however, not scout and then die against the cheese early on, then they also should just accept that. Like, you're accepting certain risks. It's like if you're going base jumping without a parachute, like, things can definitely go wrong, you know? And then don't be surprised when you splatter on the bottom of the building, you know? If the trampoline that you put up there got taken away by the police because you didn't have a license for it. Like, I'm not sure, I don't think I have a trampoline. It's like one of these. I've seen this. I've seen people, they jump without a parachute, not base jumping, but I think out of a plane, and then they fall onto like one of these massive cushions. It's where you it kind of looks like the things you jump as a kid, like a bouncy castle, but it's probably different than a bouncy castle. I remember these bouncy castles not being very sturdy when I was a 13 or 12-year-old. There's also really there's so many lines where when are you still allowed on the bouncy castle? I feel like that is truly when your youth ends. When people start looking at you weird when you're on the bouncy castle. Because as a rowdy 14-year-old, it kind of makes sense. Like, you know, it's boys being boys, you know, they have a little fight on the bouncy castle. But if you're like a 27-year-old and you're on the bouncy castle, like pushing kids around, get on out of here, son. I think it's a little bit messed up. Don't do that, guys. Trust me, don't do that. You'll be banned from bouncy castles from the entire southern part of the Netherlands if you do end up doing that. Battery over here gets built blindly. This is good as well. Okay, this is someone that realizes, hey, I took a risk in the early game, not scouting. I got a little bit of extra money because of that. Let me invest that money that I got in the early game to make sure that I remain safe against later threats that I couldn't scout. And I think this is kind of a smart play. This is exactly how Hero does it as well. when he opens up with a no scout. Now, he'd still be in serious trouble if these 3 Reapers jump into the main base, or if they just run by here. Oh yeah, this is a good move. This is some nice level playing. I'm always surprised at the Korean Diamonds. Like, they really kind of know what they're doing. This is not the greatest control, but it's still okay-ish. We see a couple of workers going down so far. 5, 6 workers. This is definitely... Oh my god. I'm so glad I was not standing behind this Terran coaching him, because I might have screamed at him a couple of times. There were like 3, 4 extra probes that should have died here. So the defense was okay. Well, actually the defense was bad, but the attack also was bad. So the level of defense perfectly matched the level of offense. So good enough for the level, I guess, is what I'm gonna say. We now have a Prism on the way. 4 gateways. 4-gate blink. This is the one of the standard builds that MaxPax has been using for a very long time. A lot of other Protoss are also using it. Initially, I think Parting was the first player to really get into those aggressive blink build orders. He used to do them very different. But yeah, nowadays it's just... it's really the bread and butter of your average Protoss players. Either 3 or 4-gate blink. And I think it's a very powerful build, especially at lower levels as well, because it requires a very specific response coming out of the Terran player. You need good building positioning, which usually isn't there. You need a lot of tanks in smart spots as well. Now, this particular variation of the 4-gate blink isn't hitting very hard. It might have something to do with the fact that he's lost a bunch of workers, or with the fact that his build order just wasn't very good. He also only has 35 workers, which is extremely low for a 4-gate blink. Blinks in, shoots the Raven. I was very close to ignoring this fight altogether, where you just cancel it out, you know? We just pretend that it never happened. But I'd like to watch both sides one more time. Just here for a second, okay? So we put the Adept in there. We have an Observer that we're not using to gather vision, which is really the only purpose of the Observer. Okay, you use it to gather vision, so you know what you're blinking into. So he's just blindly blinking into a tank right now, which is the worst thing you can do. Like, if you're not in range of the Terran, of the tank, then it's bad. If you would have blinked to the right side, you probably could have blinked outside of tank range. Okay, but there was no vision because the Observer wasn't used in that way. We continue on. Then uses his first shot for the Raven. Now, with this Stalker count, with 2 volleys, you kill a tank. You need 11 Stalker shots to kill a tank. Right now there's 8 Stalkers. That's enough to 2-volley this tank. Once you kill this tank, you're in a really good spot because there's no defense anymore. The Marine count is very low. There's a bunch of Marines in here. It's all good. So first volley is on the Raven. Second volley also on the Raven. So this tank should have been dead already right now. That's all good. And then he picks up a bunch of his Stalkers, which is actually a good move. Kills the tank and then moves away. So he got the tank, you know, 2 shots later than usual, but it's still an okay engagement. He probably should have straight up won the game, but didn't. Now, let's look at that fight again, but then take a look at it from the Terran side, because the Terran also does some very cool things here that we don't usually see in the defense. So most of the time with Terrans, what you want is you want to defend your tanks. So ideally, your tanks. Ideally, you have a unit here so you know where your opponent is blinking in from, because that's where you want to mirror the movement of your Marines, right? So Terran completely blind here. Now it's moving in. This is luck. This is luck. This is no skill. Raven moves forward, should throw down the auto turret immediately. And then here we have a move that I think in no world would be considered a good play, as he focuses his entire army with an A move on his own factory. Gets a single tank shot off on it. Doesn't get the auto turret down until very late. Gets a second shot on the factory. And then loses the tank. So we could be very critical of both players. Or we could just accept that this is what happens at this level. You know, that both players just make a lot of mistakes. Really quite a few of them. Now, Protoss still manages to win this game because there's absolutely nothing here. Or, well, at least managed to completely destroy this fight. Misses a blink and a half. It's okay. There's a single tank remaining. There's 7 Stalkers. This bunker is empty. The next Warpin should be available. Where did the Observer go? I think the Observer just got A-moved into the Raven Marine stuff. That's the thing that makes the most sense to me. If you blink on top of this bunker, the game is actually instantly over. There's no worker production behind this. There's no Nexus either starting, by the way, or hardly any worker production. Okay, kills the bunker. Like, This build, the reason why this build is so strong is because it has all-in power, but it isn't all-in. You know what I'm saying? Like this build has like it has that main dish feel, you know? It feels like this is it, but there's still something behind it. And imagine you go into a restaurant, okay? And as a starter, you get like a real nice salad. Okay, you get a proper salad. Oh, it's delicious, and there's little pieces of mango in there, and there's juices flowing around it, and maybe there's a bit of meat in there as well. Or if you're a vegetarian, some delicious fake meat, if that exists. You know, it's good. It's real good. But then after you finished with your salad and you're happy and you're ready for the main course, the guy tells you to leave the restaurant because the main course isn't there. That's kind of what I'm feeling here. Like this is a setup, a great setup for a delicious main course. And that main course exists of charge slots, 8 gateways, maybe an immortal sprinkled in there as well. As you know, the kind of the final touch could go into Storm, but none of that is happening. Hell, we don't even have a third base. Third base starts at 7 minutes into the game, which is insanely late. This is like going to a restaurant and them delivering the main dish the next day to your house. But it's cold, it's chewy, the cook spit in your food because you didn't tip the day before. Well, you left only having eaten the starter. Of course you're not gonna tip this guy. What is this? They kicked you out. This is an interesting blink, but a good one. People will go, terrible blink. No, this is a very good one. Snipes 2 tanks, even does some individual micro. The fighting inside of the auto turret range is a mistake. So, once again, really just a mixed bag of good and bad. It's like this guy went to like a pick and mix and picked some delicious candy and then saw like a dog turd stuffed into one of them, you know, them candy lockers and took it off like, delicious. And it kind of ruins the rest of the bag as well. So okay, let's just look at this blink, okay? Good blink, moves him forward, boom, second shot on the tank, clears 2 tanks. Can't get just piss off out of here. There's right now as many Marines as there are Stalkers. But rather than running away, he fights the entire duration into the auto turret damage. And auto turrets actually have pretty decent damage. That is 2 entire Stalkers that you're losing here. Maybe a bit more, like 2.5, 3 Stalkers that you're losing to auto turrets. Without that, I think you just straight up win the game here. But even with this, you're still in a phenomenal position. You're up in workers, you have a crap ton of money. You can hopefully finally get started on your main dish, which, yes, there we go. Templar Archives, charge on the way. You have so much Chrono Boost available as well. Holy crap. This guy's going to be boosting his production for the next 5 years. I mean, technically, we're still in an unlosable position here. The only thing that the Terran has is better infrastructure and better upgrades. But he doesn't really have the ability to move on the map quite yet, because there are no medeffects, and there's also no combat shield. Without combat shield moving on the map, that's a dangerous thing to do, alright? Now, Stalkers once again are being rebuilt. I think the focus on Stalkers here is a bit too heavy. Like, this is like serving the same salad again. It's like, oh, it was nice the first time, but you know, diversity is the spice of life. It's just not as good, you know? Like, it loses its value over time, these Stalkers. You really want to kind of transition out of that, and you already have the Templar Archives. Starting Storm and getting 1 or 2 Templar before the push arrives is usually a very smart play, because then you actually have Storm in order to stop that push. Okay, yeah, nice. Okay, we start the Storm, we start the Prism as well. You can store the Templar into that Prism, or you can use it to warp in more Stalkers aggressively. Gateway count is up to 6. Would love to see that go up to 8. There's plenty of cash available. Would love to see an Immortal being chronoed as well. We have our first Templar now being built. And he has the Stalkers in a good position. Once again, Observer not being used for what an Observer should be used for, and that is gathering vision, gathering information. Information is power, and we now see what happens if you don't have that information. 3 Stalkers have gone down so far against this push-out. Now, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna back one more time. When you have Stalkers on, like, the reason, okay, there's multiple reasons why Blink Stalkers are so good. The first is that it can attack multiple locations, can blink in, blink out. It's easy to keep them alive, even against stim units. It's powerful against tanks if tanks are not in good positions. But then even after that, they're useful because they A, delay your opponent's move out, and B, they can pick off units as your opponent is moving across the map. Whenever Stalkers are on the map and a Terran moves out, the Stalker player has an advantage, where You can take out 4 or 5 Marines by the time your opponent arrives, but you should be losing no Stalkers. Here, the Earth is round, kind of reverses that process and loses 3 Stalkers, doesn't delay the push, making his move out be a negative, which should never be the case. Also, forgetting to chrono this storm is kind of bad. And there's also only a single Templar still. Now we finally have that Immortal. Now finally he's starting to try and deal some damage with these Stalkers. Super Battery gets activated. We have 2 Stalkers and a Zealot in a Prism. Storm barely reaches. We still have 4 units in a Prism not participating in this fight. I'm not entirely sure why that is the case. Seems a little bit deranged in my mind. Also lifted a Templar in there at some point. I didn't see that quite either. Dropping in more and more Zealots. So there's no counterattack happening right now. There's no flank. It's just running in and out of tank range without actually killing anything. And then loses the game to someone on 37 workers, 4.5 barracks, a factory producing 1 tank, while also at the same time flowing about 2k resources. Now this is why I said, A, get the 8 gates, have constant Immortal production, or at least sprinkle some of them in. But B, this is really just... If you treat the 4-gate Blink Stalker as an all-in, and it fails, then it's an all-in. You know what I mean? If you put all your eggs in your basket, despite having 3 baskets ready, and then your 1 basket breaks, you can't be too confused. Like, the transition is so... Like, we're 11 minutes into the game. Your transition into Storm should be done 7:30. And then it's a late transition, you know? Your charge should be done freaking 7:30. You should have 8 gates. You should... Like, if your opponent hits at the 10-minute mark, I'm expecting you to have 6 bases, some type of upgrades as well out of forges, and like freaking Colossus and Storm and everything. Like, you should be practically maxed. But you treat it like an all-in, and then when your opponent holds your all-in, you're surprised that you still lose despite dealing damage. But this is not how it works, right? If you're doing a pressure build, a heavy pressure build, which 4-gate is, don't get me wrong, this is a heavy pressure build, you always need to deal damage. But you dealt sufficient damage that if you have a follow-up that is even remotely decent, you're going to win. No problem whatsoever. Like, it's going to be the easiest win of your life because you killed every single tank, you killed a bunch of workers, you delayed your opponent's production, you had overall good trades despite very mediocre micro at times. But then your transition was so slow and so bad, and your control of the big army was so poor. 4 units consistently in a prism, losing 3 Stalkers as your opponent is moving across the map. The only storm that you had, I think, got shot a bit too fast. But also, why did you only have 1 storm? Literally, you spent, 200 into Templar Archives, and Storm, I think, is also 200, and another 150 gas for a Templar. So you invested... I can do math, 550 gas for a single storm. Like, that is a lot of money for a single storm that hits 3 Marines, you know? Maybe if you're investing that much into those 2 upgrades already, into the Templar Archives and into the storm, maybe get another Templar, so at least you have 2 storm, you know? You split the cost a bit. The more Templar you make, the cheaper the initial research was, or at least per Templar it was cheaper. So yeah, I don't really think we can blame this on 4 Rex Terran pushes of 37 workers being imbalanced. This, my friend, was just a complete lack of a follow-up after good enough pressure. Your pressure was good enough. If you see this as a pressure, it was good enough. If you see it as an all-in, you have to kill your opponent, which you didn't. And you didn't. And you did see it as an all-in. So, my dear friend, Terran ain't imbalanced. You just suck. And the Earth is round. All right. That's going to be it for me today. I hope you did enjoy this episode of Is It IMBA or Do I Suck? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see all of you next time for a new video. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Be sure to leave it down in the comments as well. And ciao, ciao.